Good morning. Thank you to everyone joining our call today. It means a lot to us here at Annie's List and to the Texas women who are going to be experiencing a new Texas come September 1st. The legislative sessions this year have been grueling, and our women lawmakers have been at the forefront of every fight, working to pass good laws and block bad laws as it pertains to the health, safety, and well-being of all Texans. This session, we saw an assault on our reproductive rights that would ban abortion after 6 weeks and limit medication abortion. Once again, our women lawmakers were at the front of this fight. One lawmaker, Representative Gina Hinojosa, told a story on the House floor about the difficult decisions she made with her own pregnancy and called on our legislature to trust women with the right to choose what's best for them and their families. Despite having to play a grueling defense and against great odds, women lawmakers still passed legislation that helps Texas women. Representative Tony Rose passed a law to extend Medicaid coverage for Texas moms to 6 months. Representative Victoria Neavi once again passed multiple bills to protect survivors of sexual assault and family violence. Our lawmakers are real women with real experiences, and they're using their experiences to change Texas for the better. We have with us today a few lawmakers to talk about the laws that passed and what they mean for Texas women. I will now call upon one of the lawmakers we have with us this morning, Representative Sean Thierry.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you, Royce, and thank you to everyone for having me here today. I think I hear someone on mute or not need to be on mute. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Royce, and to everyone at Annie's List for your continued advocacy and highlighting the issues that we are facing in the legislature this grueling special session. You said it correctly, Royce. Our women's health is under attack. I will obviously, SB4 is the most pressing. We know that this bill is red meat for the Republican base, unfortunately, and they are moving, they're relentless with it. I think it is the first bill of its kind in the country that actually gives rise to vigilantism, as I see it, where private individuals are going to be allowed now, who essentially have no standing, no business in a woman's healthcare decisions, being allowed to sue them or a doctor or anyone that assists with an abortion. It's my understanding that now Planned Parenthood has a writ now before the U.S. Supreme Court, given the ruling in federal court this week. We're keeping our fingers crossed, hoping that we will have a favorable ruling on that. But this is clearly putting us back in the dark ages. And we're doing all that we can. I think you saw some of the fight on the floor recently, but our pleas are falling on deaf ears. With respect to the bill for last session that Representative Rose and I was the co-author on, that extended Medicaid coverage to 6 months. As I've said before, it's progress, but it's not enough. We really, really need 12 months of Medicaid extension postpartum for all pregnant mothers. We know that the only way to reduce the maternal mortality and morbidity rate is for equal healthcare access for all women. 12 months has always been the recommendation from ACOG and all other organizations. And for some reason, there was a need to, as I call it, quote, split the difference. There was a will to do that. And I think when it comes to the health and safety of Texas Texas moms. It is not okay to split the difference. So you have my commitment that I will continue to fight and champion that issue, so that we can get 12 months coverage for all women in Texas, pregnant moms. This is something that all of the literature shows that even if you just look at it from a cost saving standpoint, women who do not get treatment early enough end up with extended hospital stays. And so all of that puts pressures on our healthcare system. So for those who want to look at it as a fiscal issue, it is clearly in the advantage to provide this coverage for 1 year postpartum. So I wanted to, I can, pause now and take some questions, Royce, or, pivot to one of my colleagues. But those two particular issues are front and center in Texas. And those are the issues most threatening our women's health care right now.
Sean, thank you. I believe we're going to save questions for the end and hear from others of your colleagues.
We'll pass it over to Representative Ann Johnson now.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Annie's List, thank you for bringing all of us together to talk about issues that are critically important to women and our families. I appreciate everything that Representative Thiry said about the legislation that we had the 6-week ban in the regular session. Of course, we have litigation pending there. And then yesterday, you saw the continued onslaught of interfering with women's health care with the taking away of the ability to have prescription medications that can affect women's health and early termination of pregnancies. I know Representative Zwiener's on, and I'm sure she'll talk as well about all the efforts that we took on the floor to try to defeat those pieces of legislation. As far as the regular session and what's going into effect September 1, I am proud of a couple of things that we were able to do. I'm proud of House Bill 2633 that is going into effect and establishes standalone shelters for victims of human trafficking. This was a piece of legislation that was bipartisan with great support from the head of our caucus, Representative Donna Howard, and Representative Symphonia Thompson, among many others, that supports and lays out the ability to provide care for victims of human trafficking, including children, dealing with the underlying trauma and support that we need to really give them an opportunity to thrive and succeed into the future. As you know, human trafficking is a significant, serious issue in our state, and this allows really some focus on victims. I'm also proud that we passed 2 other provisions, 1401 and 1403, which focus on providing it and making it easier for juveniles to get their records sealed and ensuring that the worst human traffickers are allowed to have the highest punishment that can be given in our state. And so I want to thank my colleagues. I think both of them were very helpful on legislation of that sort. But when we talk about the legislation that's going into effect September 1, unfortunately, most of it is bad. And we really took it on the chin. This entire regular session, we've seen it in the special session. Today or tomorrow goes into effect permitless carry. And we had Moms Demand Action and moms throughout the process of running for office who talked about the need for common sense gun reform, given that we've had 4 of the top 10 mass shootings in the state of Texas in the last few years without any response. And rather than passing common sense gun reform, we have now made it easier for anybody tomorrow, the age of 21, to go out and get a weapon. We saw Republicans pass Made in Texas silencers. We saw Republicans prevent small businesses and hotels from saying, hey, you can't bring a long gun onto my property. And so we really saw them go for what they want. And so I want to remind everybody that all of these issues, women's health care, guns, education, the things that we care about, all come down to voting. And so don't forget, here we are in the moment of needing Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act on the Senate side and looking at what this Republican legislature has done to voting and really an attack on our area of Harris County. While we have made some progress within the voting bill, there are 2 key things that they just refuse to allow to be incorporated in the idea of voting access. And that is drive-through voting, something that was unique to Harris County. But remember, 60% of those who use drive-through voting were women. And that makes sense because women are caregivers, may have somebody in the car that they're caring for, may have children in the car. And so that was an innovative issue that it made it easier for women to vote. That has now been gutted and taken away. 24-hour voting. So many individuals who have to work 2 or 3 jobs had access to the ballot box in Harris County, and almost 55% of those who use 24-hour voting were from communities of color. And so again, it is really critical that we remind everybody, but especially women, that of all the issues that we care about, participating, getting out, voting, continuing to fight in the ways that we can is absolutely vital and critical for women's health and the good of all of our families. So thank you very much. I'm proud to be in this fight with you.
Thank you so much, Representative Johnson. We'll turn it over now to Representative Zwiener, and then after Representative Zwiener speaks, we will open it up to questions from the press.
I'm in full agreement with everything my colleagues have mentioned. So I'll add a couple items. First, I'll start with a happy thing. In terms of positive impacts on women, in addition to Rep. Rose's legislation that Representative Thiry mentioned, I'm really proud of passing Senate Bill 41. And Senate Bill 41 is something I worked on with Senator Judith Zaffirini that expands workplace sexual harassment protections to workplaces of all sizes. Right now, if you work at an employer with fewer than 15 employees, you have no sexual harassment protections whatsoever in Texas. You can't go to Texas Workforce Commission and even make a complaint. They will deny your complaint out of hand because of the size of your employer. Tomorrow, September 1st, that will change. And every single Texas worker will be able to file a complaint with Texas Workforce Commission and have a fair shot at due process for what they've experienced in the workplace. That is an important step forward. In addition, Representative Victoria Neave and Senator Zaffirini were able to move legislation forward that extended the time that people can report following a sexual harassment episode from 6 months to a year. So we do have some small progress there in terms of improving access to due process for Texas workers. And I'm very proud of that. So that's the good. Let's talk about the bad. The bad, as my colleagues mentioned, is Texas Republicans have now voted not once, but twice to completely ban abortion in Texas. And then to add insult to the injury, right now, they are pushing through legislation that arbitrarily bans access to one of the easiest, most convenient, most popular forms of first trimester abortion. And they're doing this as a safeguard, just in case one of those bills to ban abortion goes down in the courts. It's incredibly frustrating to again and again have these bills attacking access to reproductive health care be dressed up as women's health when they don't do anything to make women healthier. And when we struggle to push forward legislation that does protect women's health, when we struggle to move forward legislation that protects women's access to contraception or to medical care during and after pregnancy, women's health gets used as an excuse to limit our options, and that's just wrong. And that's what we'll be fighting on the floor later today as SB 4 comes up for a final vote. I also want to note that we've talked a lot about legislation to whitewash history, but that legislation is also designed to take conversations about gender out of history as well. House Bill 3979 that passed through the regular session makes it harder for educators to teach about race in the social studies classroom, but it also makes it harder for them to teach about gender and the history of the women's suffrage movement and women's rights movements. And that's something that will doubly impact women of color, where stories about their history, both on the race side and the gender side, may be silenced by this legislation. Right now, the House is also looking at legislation to expand that work to apply those bans not only to the social studies classroom, but every single classroom in the state. I'm really worried that could end up banning books like Raisin in the Sun, or The Handmaid's Tale, or To Kill a Mockingbird. These are works by women authors that highlight issues of both race and gender. And those could theoretically be complained about by teachers. I'm sorry, not by teachers, by those works could theoretically be complained about by parents who say it's making their students uncomfortable. You know, that's just not right. We need to not ban books in Texas. We need to teach complete history, both with regards to race and with regards to gender. That bill is luckily still in committee during the special session. I hope it will stay there. But what we really need is for every single person, and particularly women, to stand up and advocate for the issues they care about. And the issue I am hearing women ask for, the issue I am hearing from women begging us to work on, is COVID safety. And so my biggest hope is that during this special session, we will advance legislation in the House to affirm that Texas school districts can require masks. We see COVID cases escalating all across the state. I was just looking up one of the numbers for one of my school districts, Hayes CISD. They have 134 active cases right now on their campuses. And that is identical to their peak last January. And it looks like the numbers are still trending upwards. Texas moms are begging us to help keep their children safe. And so I think the best thing we can do as a legislature right now is to affirm that Texas school districts can require masks and tell Governor Abbott to quit playing games with our children's safety.
Thank you so much, Rep. Streeter. We have a few members of the media. We have got CBS Austin, KXAN, Joy Diaz, Michael Board, a few others. If any of you would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
All right, I guess I'll start off. My name is Michael Board. I'm a reporter with WOAI News in San Antonio. This message is for Ms. Johnson, since you spoke about the constitutional carry bill that's going to be going into effect. If I could ask you to sort of explain your concerns you have about constitutional carry, and also your concerns, I don't know if you have concerns or not, or how you might think constitutional carry might affect women's issues like domestic abuse and domestic violence in Texas.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't call it constitutional carry. I would call it criminal carry. I mean, this basically allows anybody who's over the age of 21 to go in and get a weapon. At least in Texas, in the past, when we had issues around concealed handgun license, at least you had some training, something that you had to go through, and some small bit of vetting. Now it's wide open. Anybody tomorrow over the age of 21, that's the only requirement, can go into any sporting goods store and buy a gun and bullets and have no understanding or idea of what to do with them. And so again, this is kind of the Wild West that we have turned to. What's even more offensive to me about it is not only did the legislature expand access to anybody over 21, but they took away the right of small business to protect their employees and their patrons. And so you all know that we've got those signs that you can put on the door that say, hey, no carrying in here. Now you have additional signage for concealed handgun carry and open carry. And even that warning by a business is merely just a suggestion as far as the Republicans are concerned. It is a Class C violation to disregard that signage and go in. That's like you getting a speeding ticket. If you go into that business with a weapon, and let's say you have an AR-15 strapped on your back and you walk in, and I've had my rural colleagues say, and that's crazy, that doesn't happen. I've experienced it twice, where somebody being provocative has walked into a coffee shop or a hairdresser spot, and they are doing it on purpose. Now the business has to confront that individual and has to give them an oral warning and say, we have a sign out front and we do not want you in here with a weapon. And it is only at that point that they disregard that they can then call the police for basically a misdemeanor trespass. The idea, as small businesses in our community talked about, they have students working their doors of their bakery, or they have elderly individuals or people with disabilities. The idea that now they have to become the police force that the state won't take the responsibility for is a risk. Look at the interactions we've seen in banks or other places when you ask people to wear a mask and the outrage that they've shown. We now have the potential for that with an assault weapon. And it makes no common sense. And I think it's just a fundamental disagreement in a state where we have seen an increase and rise in violence. They believe more guns is the solution. And I believe responsible common sense gun reform of deciding who has the responsibility of having a weapon is the better solution. And so they have won their path. And that's what's so frightening to me.
Thank you so much, Rep. Johnson. We'll take the next question. Any more questions? All right, well, if there's no more questions from our media, we will go ahead.
Please
and-
forgive me, I couldn't
Oh,
unmute myself.
No worries.
You know how it is, you have 20 screens working at the same time. This is Joy Diaz with the Texas Standard. I wanted to ask you, particularly because of the times we're living, it's difficult to say what can be done when it comes to women's health. What can be done with the issue of abortion in the state of Texas, especially after what we're witnessing right now. So that's the question to you all, strategically, what can be done?
Aaron, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, one of the first things we could do for women's health, as Representative Thierry mentioned earlier, we can expand postpartum care for women on Medicaid to a full 6 months. And that's something that, as a generous cost estimate, would cost us about $40 million to expand that postpartum care to 12 months instead of just 6 months like we did in the last legislative session. And we're spending more money than that to prosecute people for criminal trespass at the border. So our budgets are a document that shows our priorities and our values. And right now our values are consistently showing that we don't value women. We value red meat fights over actual people who are suffering and who are having worse health outcomes because of lack of access to care. So I think expanding that postpartum coverage is a big one. But on an even bigger scale and a more critical scale, we could expand access to Medicaid. So if we expanded Medicaid here in Texas, it would cover millions more Texans. And a lot of those would be women. And a lot of those would be moms as well, who would have consistent access to healthcare coverage. That also means from a reproductive health perspective, they would have access to contraception and likely be less likely to need an abortion. Those are steps that we haven't seen leadership willing to make. We're going to keep fighting for them. We did see a few cracks in the anti-Medicaid expansion dam this past session, but not enough to break it down. I'm hopeful that if we keep pushing, we will get there. And it's important to note that right now, if we expanded Medicaid, it is actually positive for the state budget because of the improved federal match we would receive for everyone currently on Medicaid. There's no good reason not to take that step forward, and that's the single most important thing we can do to protect women's health.
If you forgive me, just as a follow-up with the same question, the thing that I'm thinking is about the creativity of not just the governor, but other people. Yes, it is red meat, but the way it is implemented, you know, like for instance, the apprehension of migrants at the border, that's a very creative use of the way, you know, to push an agenda. I mean, are you guys thinking creatively that way, not just giving us the facts? Because as we know, it's difficult to make progress simply using the facts.
I'd like to answer that one if I may hop in. This is Representative Thierry. Hi. One of the things I will say, you know, you're exactly right. We do have to be creative and use the fact that, you know, their talking points, you know, we've got to tell them to basically put their money where their mouth is. When I remember in the 85th legislative session, when I first started pushing the maternal mortality issue, I really thought outside the box and I said, well, wait a minute. you all, I talked to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and said, if you're pro-life, how can you not be for passing legislation that would provide coverage for women who are pregnant, who are choosing life? I said, healthy moms means healthy babies. And so when I wrote a letter back then, we went to special session, and that was the very controversial session for the bathroom bill, as we called it. And the only thing that was on the call were traditional red meat issues. But I wrote a letter to Governor Abbott, and I reached out to Senator Colcourse at the time because she was working on maternal mortality as well. And I asked her to joint author that letter with me. And I said, I'm going to write to Governor Abbott and ask him to add this to the special session call, the issue of reducing the maternal mortality and morbidity rate in Texas. And at that time, everyone told me, Rep. Theory, you're a freshman and you're but go right ahead. He did add it to the call. Because I framed it from the issue of a pro-life would say it's a slow walk to Christ. I'll be going into my 4th term, and we are still talking about reducing the maternal mortality and morbidity rate. However, as Rep. Sweeter and I and others have talked about, we are finally at the point where we were able to at least get 6 months coverage for Medicaid postpartum for women. A lot of that came from that same creativity of pro-life and saying these are women that are choosing life. So now, we're still doing that. This past session, I failed to mention this bill. We talked about doula services. I passed a bill in the House. It didn't clear the Senate, which was for the first time in Texas, was going to allow Medicaid to cover services for pregnant mothers who use doula assistance. And that was a real challenge to get over, get through the end zone in the House because it was Medicaid, had the M word. However, when we talked about the fact that there are these, again, are pregnant moms, women choosing life, who need this assistance, and that the data already was clear that women who have doulas have healthier pregnancies, it reduces the need for cesareans. And so I was able to get some Republican women to join author that bill with me. And that's how we got it through the House. Unfortunately, the Senate did not take it up. At that time, they had decided to be punitive to the House and stop giving hearings for all House bills. So I think that there still is some opportunity for that. And so specifically to answer your question with regard to creativity, it's really important that we sit down and say, hey, you've said you stand for this. Don't look at it as a Democrat or a Republican issue. Take away the hyper-partisanship. This is an issue you can support. I went to TCC and said, look, this is something. Initially, I had a unfavorable on that bill, the doula bill. I called it the We Love Doulas bill. And after I explained it and walked them through it, they said, okay, Representative Theory, we're going to go from a unfavorable to neutral. We didn't quite understand it. We just saw a Democrat's name by it. We saw doulas, we saw Medicaid, and we got, anxious when we looked at it. But once I really explained that these were women, pregnant moms who deserve care so they can have healthy babies, it did move the needle. So to your point, we've got to just keep having those conversations and not give up.
All right, we will, in the interest of time, we're going to take one more question if you have it. All right, thank you so much. That concludes our press call. We will follow up with some information on how to get a hold of how to connect you with these legislators. We thank you so much for your time, for everyone who joined, and that'll conclude our call. Thank you so much. Y'all have a good one.